Jewish Nazis in Ukraine making a rocky relationship worse. Israel is outraged by offensive remarks from Russia's chief diplomat, calling Jews anti-Semitic and claiming Adolf Hitler had Jewish heritage. Just days after the world remembered 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust by Adolf Hitler, Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov said Nazi leader Adolf Hitler was part Jewish.
If I remember correctly, I may be wrong, but Hitler also had Jewish origins, so it doesn't mean absolutely anything. For some time, we've heard from the wise Jewish people that the biggest anti-Semites were Jewish.
Joining us with more is Middle East Forum Director Gregg. Gregg, it seems Russian officials aren't too concerned about winning friends and influencing people at a time when they need all the support they can get. What do you make of this in Lavrov's remarks?
I think that Lavrov's increasingly extremist rhetoric and his inability to defend the Russian position has now landed on the oldest, most despicable form of pernicious hatred, anti-Semitism. And the fact that he's using tropes, slurs, which belong more in the book of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion or in Hitler's Mein Kampf is derivative of the fact that he and his country have a losing position. Now that he's targeting Jews and Israelis, it really must mean that he's on the downward slide to defeat.
Well, it sure does. I mean, I can't understand why he would do that. Isn't it a time when he needs more worldwide support rather than less?
Israel was walking a fine line between acting as a neutral arbiter between Ukraine and Russia. On one hand, setting up a field hospital outside of Lviv in western Ukraine, but also on the other hand, trying not to make any what could be considered inflammatory or biased remarks against Russia.
And yes, you mentioned Israel has done a lot to help Ukrainian refugees. Many have been resettled into the Jewish state. And so with Russian or post-Soviet era Jews now making up about 15% of the Israeli population, it seems that Israel has been cautious, as you mentioned, about its approach in the war in Ukraine. Now, after this statement from Lavrov, do you think Israel may be more supportive of Ukraine now, maybe militarily? Your thoughts on that?
Israel's Ministry of Defense, about 2 hours after Lavrov made his statements, indicated that they would increase the amount of defensive weaponry that they would be supplying to the Ukrainian government. This is a cause and effect situation where Lavrov crossed the line, and now the Israelis are responding in kind by giving their military prowess on the defensive side of the way in which they operate to help Ukraine rebuff Russian invasion, and also at the same time showing Moscow that there's consequences for their rhetoric.
Well, let's shift now to Middle East terrorism, because I know you're an expert on the Middle East. Their possible infiltration into the USA, a recent Fox News FOIA request with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and a separate one from Texas Congressman Chip Roy, found at least 23 migrants, maybe as many as 42, matching the FBI terrorist database when they were caught crossing into the U.S. during the first 11 months of Joe Biden's presidency. So how significant, Gregg, is that? Your thoughts?
It's incredibly significant. There was even another report that came out this week from Project Veritas. A whistleblower inside of DHS said that the immigration and customs enforcement officers who patrol the border, but who were also responsible for resettling Afghan refugees in this country, found an additional 5 named terrorists who either participated in violent attacks against U.S. forces in Afghanistan or who were responsible for explosives being used against Allied forces in Kabul. The situation is getting dire and more worse as this administration pursues political expediency and correctness at the expense of American national security standards. And the fact that we are in such a downward regression in our ability to not just secure our border, preventing dozens of known terrorists on our FBI's watch list coming into this country, but that we're extending that by outsourcing our immigration to countries like Qatar, a main state sponsor of terrorism, shows just how feeble our immigration system is. And to be able to fix it, the Biden administration has to look at immigrants' ideology into this country, in addition to firming up our security controls at America's airports and land border crossings. If that doesn't happen, we can expect more violent individuals and known politically violent individuals who are radicalized with extremist ideology to come to this country and to have the potential for attacks.
So it isn't just shutting down the southern border. I mean, there's still an issue at airports and elsewhere, right?
100%. The screening processes which are currently being used by our customs officials and by our border entry officials is not dependent on the extremist ideology which permeates the majority of the most violent so-called refugees, I would call them, repeat offenders who were caught in their own country. Now they're trying to flee because they have their own violent tendencies that their host countries were not allowing them to stay present for. And until they start asking the very firm questions on whether their personal values match with American values, they should be continued to be not let into this country. But that's not the current situation. They are freely being allowed to enter the United States.
Okay, Gregg Roman, director of the Middle East Forum. As always, Gregg, we appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.